One Nation, One Election Bill that was introduced in Lok Sabha on Tuesday. Mr. Krishnamurthy served as the 13th Chief Election Commissioner, is also a former Indian Revenue Service officer. Welcome, Mr. Krishnamurthy, and let me begin this conversation by asking you, is One Nation, One Poll necessary?
My answer will be it's desirable. Whether it is necessary is a moot point because there are many issues involved in it, whether the political parties will accept it, whether constitutionally it is possible to introduce it. But from the point of view of administration, it is indeed desirable because you not only save time, energy, and also cutting down expenditure. So as an administrative measure, it is certainly a welcome proposal.
Sir, we have not resolved the issue of black money in polls, which is a real problem. So, can ONOP deal with that issue? Because that's the elephant in the room, sir.
Certainly not. Actually, as far as the election expenditure is concerned, I don't think it has any relationship with One Nation, One Poll, except saying that instead of incurring expenditure twice for elections, you are trying to cut down the expenditure. But as far as black money role is concerned, there is no doubt that a lot of money is spent on Indian elections, which are legally may not be justifiable, but then there are enough loopholes for the money to be spent, and the funds are also, the source of funds is also questionable because we have an objectionable nexus between the corporates and the political parties. So it does certainly taints the policy making of the party in power. So it is a different thing as far as the black money impact on the elections. But on the expenditure side, yes, there is certainly a improvement if it is combined and held together.
Sir, election in India is also about economy. So my question to you is that ONOP is looked from the governance perspective, but what about from the expenditure perspective that elections create that end up lifting the economy, which creates a demand for services?
As far as expenditure on the consumption or expenditure on the various electoral campaigns, etc., well, it has its own benefit to the economy, no doubt about it. But then, are you looking at it from the angle of undesirable expenditure, or are you looking at, because if you can save some expenditure from the conduct of the elections, both from the government as well as from the political party side, to that extent, those savings could be used for more productive purposes. I'm not saying that election is not a productive expenditure. It is indeed. It has its own benefits. But more productive expenditure, the money could have been used for more productive expenditure than spending for the elections twice over, for the state election as well as parliament elections.
So, well, if we look at the other countries who have undergone one election, it has also led to a lot of issues. For example, if we look at the Indonesian case, 100 plus people died involved in elections out of exhaustion. This was reported. The mobilization of people again was an issue because, like India, Indonesia is a big country. So what will be the challenge for the government in future if this election is held, which is simultaneous election?
Administratively, I agree it's going to be a big challenge, but it is not an insurmountable challenge. Certainly, the polling stations have to be strengthened. The electronic voting machines have to be increased. The law and order situation has to be taken care of by deploying more central paramilitary forces. More manpower will be required for manning the polling stations. So there is no doubt that administratively it will be a big challenge. But it is not probably appropriate to compare Indonesia with India. Indonesia has got many problems. In fact, it is a country with different timings, different time zones, and with so much of variation from one zone to another. As far as we are concerned, I think holding an election on a particular day, it is not very difficult, though there are issues which are to be considered by the administration of the management, by the Election Commission.
Mr. Krishnamurthy, we have a federal structure. The lot of regional parties are afraid that when elections will be held simultaneously, the national narrative will subsume the regional or the local narrative. Election Commission of India has done a brilliant job in keeping electoral democracy alive in this country, despite political pressures. But I don't think narratives can be dealt so easily by any government institution, let alone ECI. So in that perspective, I ask you, how do you look at it?
Before I answer your question, one more point on my earlier question I thought I should mention. India has got a very rich experience in conducting elections for more than 70 years. And we have trained manpower, we have enough manuals, enough administrative backup. So it may not be appropriate to compare it with a country like Indonesia. That is one point. Second, as far as the second issue you mentioned about the federal structure, I do agree that one day, one nation, one poll may have some kind of an impact on the federal feature of the constitution. But it is not that very highly important in the sense that we have had experience of holding elections together till 1967. Thereafter as well, on many elections, on many states and parliament elections have been held together. People have voted differently for the state and differently for the center. So it is not as though the voters are not unaware of the implications between holding elections simultaneously or holding it separately. So that is not a very valid argument to reject it. If you think that the people should have enough time to address issues on local issues different from the central issues, yes, there is a point, because if you are holding it together, normally the dominant issues will be the central government issues and not so much the state issues. It is quite likely that it may have some kind of an adverse impact. But from the point of view of an argument that, federal issues will not be given that kind of an importance, so far our experience doesn't warrant this kind of a conclusion.
Do you think that can stand the test of the constitution? A lot of parliamentarians were arguing that it is going against the basic structure of the constitution. Can you just take us through this nuance?
Yeah, in fact, this is one important issue on which I have my own apprehensions. The high-level committee has recommended that the majority resolution in the parliament is good enough for bringing about. I am sure the political parties will not be accepting it, and they will be challenging it. It will go to the courts. So it is bound to be challenged in the courts. But if I'm not an expert on the Constitution, though I'm a law degree holder, but I cannot say that I have an authority to speak on the Constitution. If the recommendation of the high-level committee is accepted or is justified in the courts, then there should be no difficulty. But I am sure that the states will crave for their own participation in the amendment, and they will have their own arguments for this purpose. So it is quite likely that this will be a very serious obstacle to implementing this particular project.
So are you saying that this particular issue in which the states would like to have a say will be one of the roadblocks in front of the government?
Quite likely. This is one of the things I do anticipate. But again, there is another point on the local self-government election. They have said a second, that for that purpose, they may go to the states for the consent. And I'm not sure whether the state governments will be able to approve of this, particularly because the elections have to be held within 100 days. There can be practical difficulties in holding elections within 100 days. So there are practical issues, but administratively and on financial grounds only, I would say, it is not a proposal which needs to be rejected.
So when you talk about these nitty-gritties, I would say that the God lies in detail, and that is why the bill needs to be examined. A lot of people have argued against this, that politics has to be seen from the context of democracy. It just cannot be seen from the context of governance. The democratic activity inside legislature is also part and parcel of the larger ecosystem, sir.
I entirely agree with you. In fact, such a measure, it would be ideal if you can have some kind of a political consensus. In fact, I'm writing a book on the state of global democracies. This is one of the points I'm making. See, whenever you have a large country, federal or unitary, it is always better to have a consensus among the political parties. Unfortunately, in India, electoral reforms have received least attention among the political parties. If you browse through the manifestos of most of the political parties, you will find there is no reference to electoral reforms at all. So I would strongly urge a proper consensus to be arrived at least on a broad issues, if not on the nitty-gritty details, at least on the broad issues, so that it doesn't face unnecessary challenges and obstacles.
So let me ask you, if you look at the books written by the former election commissioners, they've had their views on the electoral reforms, but I don't think one nation, one election topped the list of the electoral reforms. It was not there, but it has become a point of contest. So what are the 5 big electoral reforms that India requires?
In my opinion, the most important change that India requires is in the system of voting. We have what is known as the first past post system, which results in a person getting a winner, they win this election even with a difference of 1 vote. So this must be changed because, in my opinion, if in a representative democracy, the representative should represent at least, if not 50%, at least 33 and 1/3% of the voters. If this change can be brought about, it may result in a lot of improvement in our electoral system. Unfortunately, the present system allows the small parties to thrive and even sometimes dictate terms in the formation of government, because you can win in a constituency with 20 to 25% of votes polled. This is not a very desirable system. So there are many alternatives like proportional representation or a mixed system and so on. But this, in my opinion, is the most important and urgent reform that India should have, because it will certainly strengthen the unity of this country.
Anything to do with the black money?
I beg your pardon?
What about black money?
Yes, the second reform I would say is about the regulation of expenditure.
Yes.
At the moment, the donations to political parties by corporates have been, the electoral bond scheme was, of course, held unconstitutional. In fact, I had myself said it was not a very transparent system. So my suggestion is to have a national election fund where corporates and individuals can give donations and have 100% tax exemption. That money could be used for conducting the elections, and there can be a consensus arrived at by the Election Commission with the political parties about the way in which the money has to be distributed. It can be in the form of cash or in the form of kind. There are many suggestions in this regard. So the obnoxious nexus between the corporates and the political parties needs to be snapped. It is indeed a very important reform that is required.
And my last question to you very quickly, sir. All said and done, but Election Commission of India, a lot of people say is like a toothless tiger. People make all sorts of comments and they get away in every election.
Well, this is where again there are differences of opinion. People think that the Election Commission has got enormous powers to conduct the elections. To some extent it is true, but it is not fully true at all. Because in the implementation of Model Code of Conduct, we have tremendous challenges and difficulties in enforcing a peaceful conduct of elections. So in my opinion, some aspects of Model Code of Conduct need to be given a legislative sanction, and the Election Commission should have the power to impose penalties. They cannot imprison anybody, they can impose penalties, they can impose damages to be given, and so on. So there are methods by which the Model Code of Conduct can be better enforced. Absolutely. If it is given, at least to some extent, legislative sanction.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for speaking with News9.
Thank you very much. Thank you.